I really am talking to the people sitting at Pavillion's campus right now and thinking of you guys as you kind of figure out your way around this and how to make sobriety work for you. So please, thank you so much for letting me speak and listening to me today. So I'll start like most of us do. I've never told my whole story for this long before, so bear with me. I'm afraid that I've worn too much mascara because I'm a crier. So we'll be in this together. But I was born the youngest of 4 girls. My 3 sisters are 8, 9, and 11 years older than me. So there's a significant age gap. I used to say that I'm the worst characteristics of the youngest child and the only child. So there were a couple of traumatic events that happened to me when I was little that kind of informed the anxiety that I hold still today as an adult, one of which was that I drowned. When I was 1 year old, my sister found me floating in the pool, screamed for my mother. And my mom called 911, did CPR with them on the phone, and eventually saved my life, thank God. But that story and the retelling of that story, it never occurred to me how damaging that was for a young child to hear over and over and over again, and how damaging it was for my family to live through. So that's one thing that informed my anxiety that I had no idea about. It just always seemed like a part of my childhood. And another thing was, while that was happening, my grandfather was molesting the same sister that found me. A fact I didn't know about until I was in my 20s and going to college, and she was still trying to figure out and navigate her way through all of that. And something that we also didn't know was that my mother had also been a victim of my grandfather. My grandfather is an important figure in my life story because I share something terrible with him, and that we are both alcoholics. He passed away when I was 7. So I've got very little memory of him. That's positive, but certainly very little memory of him altogether. And when I found out that he had hurt my sister and my mom, I became pretty angry. When I found out that I was the only other alcoholic in the family that had been diagnosed, having this bond with him has been something that I've kind of needed to accept and come to terms with within myself. So going back, so that was 1 year old, and I'm kind of being born into chaos at this point. So my family uprooted everybody from Florida and moved to Irian Jaya, Indonesia, which is actually the rainforest there. My dad is in mining and construction, and there was an international opportunity to get him away from lime and phosphate in Central Florida, where I'm from, and move his whole family to the middle of nowhere. So that's what we did. It was an experience. We lived there for 3 years. I don't remember much of it. I learned a great deal about the English language, about interacting with other cultures. But luckily for me, I don't remember the actually indigenous people revolting against our village violently. And we actually had to escape. So that was another kind of chaos that seemed like fun, seemed like something that, set me apart from my peers. But as I'll go on to say, the more that set me apart from my peers was also something that damned me in the long run. The more differences I felt, the more different I felt. So by the time I moved to the States, I was 4 and had all of these life experiences that I was trying to talk to my friends about, and they would accuse me of lying or making it up, or they just wouldn't understand. And I spent most of my time hating myself, feeling like there was just something wrong with me that I couldn't communicate with anybody to fit in. And that really only got worse when we moved to North Carolina. My dad was cheating on my mom. He was working internationally and cheated on her in like spectacular ways. We're talking women that were significantly younger, in their teens, women abroad, women domestic. It was a glorious spectacle of just piggish behavior ultimately. But my parents tried to work it out. And so they were like, you know what, you're quitting your job in the mining company. We're stopping this situation where you work internationally and we live in Florida, and we're going to North Carolina. So we bought a tree farm, or a piece of property in North Carolina that my family turned into a tree farm. And that's where I learned to work. That's where I went to school. And that's where I learned a great deal of life lessons and lack thereof. In Lenore, North Carolina, where that was located, I felt even more different because now I've got Floridian experiences informed by my international experiences, going to an extremely rural area. And I'm not in main town mainstream Lenore. I'm in the outskirts of it in an area called Kings Creek. My class had 30 people in it. My whole school had about 150 in a K through 8 school. It was extremely small. And I went from having gifted programs and teachers that supported me and, math programs that were on other levels that I was able to participate in Florida, and my reading level was really high. North Carolina, they didn't give a shit about it. Not only did they not care, and I apologize about my language because I'm sure there are people there that are uncomfortable with that, and I apologize. But nobody in North Carolina cared about how smart I was. All that mattered was taking me down several pegs and making sure that any international experience I had, any presumptuousness I had as this 8-year-old walking around needed to be popped immediately. And I was taken down by every teacher I had. I was too much in class, and I'm sure I was. But it really, really put distance in myself and again between my peers, because I'm sitting there humiliated all the time, just wondering why my teachers are kind of coming after me. Meanwhile, I'm mad at them for not understanding me, working on my reading like I want them to, asking me about my travel experiences. Nobody cared. So I started to absolutely turn away from the mainstream and all popular kids. I was in cheerleading and I did basketball and I did all the things, but I had no faith in anybody that I was friends with to actually maintain a friendship with me. And I decided very early that I was actually not interested in maintaining friendships with people because they would only hurt me in the end. And ultimately they would just call me a liar or I wasn't good at them. I didn't mean to run over people with my emotions, but I would do that on accident or my big experiences. And so over time, I learned to rely solely on myself and my anxieties about the way I was coming across to other people. And that created a very, very toxic environment. So we've got the chaos of my childhood, the insecurity that I'm now facing as a preteen, going into teenager, and I discovered alcohol. And I knew that my grandfather was an alcoholic because my mom had told me. And that's all I knew about that situation. So I knew that alcohol was not to be messed with, but my parents also didn't really drink around me. I was fortunate in that way. So I come by my alcoholism very honestly. And the first time I took a shot at a friend's house, when their parents weren't there, I think I was in middle school. And I remember going to the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror, hammered drunk. And I had tried to fix my eyebrows, but I think I tried to do it with like a marker or something. It was bad. So I'm looking at myself in the mirror. And I just remember thinking, this is the greatest feeling I'm ever going to have. This is it. Like being drunk is the best it's ever going to get. And I believed it and I felt it. And 14 months sober, still feel it a little bit to this day. That was the best I ever felt. I had no idea what was happening in that moment, but the alcohol was telling me, you need me. And I never doubted it for a second after that point. So fast forward to sophomore year of high school, I get caught drinking in the woods with 4 guys that were in their 20s. And me and my friend Frankie's a girl who we showed up to a friend of a friend, and then he had friends and then brought his friends. And now we're all hammered drunk sitting around this campfire in the middle of Hickory, North Carolina. And the cops roll up. Somebody has gone to get more beer and they've ratted us out. And I am in so much trouble. I'm hammered, as I mentioned, and now my mother has been called by the police to come and get me. So this is the first of a string of run-ins with the law that I have, and it's almost always involving anxiety and alcohol. So my mom rolls up. She was driving a 911 Porsche at the time. Not a good way to fit in, Mom. Rolls up to the scene, hits a rock. The car jumps in the air and then comes back down. And she opens the door and goes, well, this is a fucking motley crew you've assembled here, Emily. Get in the car. And then I was forced to punish myself, as I often was. I gave myself 2 months of grounding for that experience. And I was never allowed to hang out with my friends that were there again. So, including in college. So that was an interesting experience. And that honestly should have told me, hey, these drinking things, you're not even 17 yet. And these drinking things are really already hitting you. I had this euphoric experience. Now I'm caught and now I have a record and I had to do volunteer work. So I ended up working at the School of Music in downtown Lenore, North Carolina, and learning piano, which was a fantastic thing. And that's what I tend to do. Anytime alcohol would point to me and say, there's something going on here, I would use it and say, no, this was a catalyst for something amazing. And I think that's a great quality, but I also think it kept me from getting the help that I needed. So fast forward again. So I've done my community service for the getting caught drinking in the woods. I get caught by my mom drinking in the guest house that she had created. I had stolen the peppermint schnapps, and I got a smack on the wrist, and that was about it. I got nothing but speeding tickets, and this is where it kind of begins. I think I've accumulated like 13 in my life. And it's not because well, you can call that bad driving if you would like, that's fine. I will take that, but it's not because I'm an insane driver. I have intense anxiety, and I'll look down and I'm going 10 over the speed limit without even realizing it. So that's where the tickets began. And again, this isn't happening to my friends. All the speeding tickets, the drinking euphoria, I was the only one that consistently wanted to drink. Like, what do you guys want to do? Hey, I have an idea. Why don't we call Tommy? Tommy's not that cute, but Tommy thinks that I'm cute, and Tommy knows how to get beer. And so let's call Tommy. And so that's where you kind of start selling out and saying, okay, yeah, Tommy, poor Tommy, looking back on it. But, Tommy got called a few times for alcohol runs from me and my friends. And again, hindsight's 2020. But I go to college and everything's great. My sister is there. She's older than me. She's getting her doctorate at the time, and she's buying me alcohol whenever I ask for it. And my friends and I are just getting sloshed. I remember being so sick and having to take Mucinex, and that wouldn't stop me from drinking. I threw up in my bathtub multiple times because no matter what was going on with me, I would always find a way to drink. The next morning, if I was still feeling hungover, I would do what a lot of college students do and take a shot, hair of the dog. It helps. My favorite thing to do was making friends in class and then going and grabbing a drink afterwards as a bonding experience. But again, I had no concept of how harmful I was being to myself. Anytime I was in a relationship, I was a bit of a serial monogamist, which is hard to believe given that I was drunk quite a bit of the time. I found people that would put up with that, unfortunately. But I would get into huge fights with my boyfriends because I would get so wildly insecure. I would feel so different from everybody else, every other woman, instead of lashing out like some of us do and say like, oh, she's terrible. She's the worst. She's everything. Everything is everything to everyone else but me. And I cry to say that now because it still plagues me from time to time. But in college, it was so sad to think about. I couldn't go out and enjoy my friends that were beautiful because I was so concerned that I would never be as beautiful as they were. And that never matters. Because you're focusing on the wrong things at that point. And I really regret not making the memories, but I didn't. And again, alcohol was kind of morphing and changing. So now instead of being this thing that I want and that creates a party, and it made me scoot on the floor in high school, I got a nickname named Scooter. I would get on my back and use my legs to propel me about. And I would say hello to people. And I would say hello to like very attractive men, ladies, and gentlemen. And I did get a boyfriend that way, but it was only the one. The rest of them, I'm pretty sure, were not into the scooting, but I digress. So going back to college, I should have realized that I was having a problem, but I really wasn't drinking every single night until I turned 21. And then I started cooking. Cooking was the perfect way to drink. And I just started dating a guy who, I'm actually in his place right now. But I started dating a guy who loved jazz and like literature and cooking and wine, and taught me about red wine. And I loved it. I took that ball and I ran all the way home with it. By the end of my turn with alcoholism, I was having it delivered to my door, and it was my drink of choice. So he introduced me to red wine and cooking, and college became this. I wanted to become this sophisticated drunk person. So anywhere I would go, I thought it would be funny to show up with a box of wine because that's enough for me, barely. And it's enough to share a little bit and it makes me look like a good time. But really, I'm thinking, is this going to be enough for me? Is 4 bottles of wine going to get the job done? Again, should have thought in college that that was a problem. So I start going to therapy. My parents blow up. They go through a nasty divorce because my dad's cheating eventually gets to a head and my mom doesn't take it anymore. So I start going to therapy and he's like, well, are you an alcoholic? And this is after I very gently told him, I'll have 2 or 3 drinks at the bar because I'm lying to him. And he's like, well, are you an alcoholic? And I said, why would you say that? Terrified that he's like seen something within me that I'm trying to hide from him. And he says, well, 2 or 3 drinks is just excessive, Emily. And at that point, I was like, I'm lying to you about how much I'm drinking. That ain't even covering a little bit of it. If you think that's a problem, I'm not even going to come close to talking to you about what my real experiences look like with alcohol because I was so embarrassed. And I also thought, I'm in college, 2 to 3 drinks is not reasonable to expect from me. So now your expectations are way out of anything I'm willing to give you. So I was really embarrassed and I spent the majority of the time thinking, oh my God, am I an alcoholic? Every time I would drink for the rest of college. And that was about 2 years of terrified drinking. And it only propelled me into a worse state of mind of like, am I an alcoholic? I'm going to order another shot. I'm going to order everybody else another shot because alcoholics want to be alone, right? Alcoholics aren't good with people. Alcoholics don't have a bunch of friends. I have a bunch of friends. Every time I would go out to bars, I would be the one that would always facilitate the shots. I didn't mind spending any amount of money just to make sure that I got as drunk as I needed without anybody looking at me. So I would buy as many drinks as anybody needed to make sure that I wasn't the one that was too far. And that followed me hardcore. I took a job as a first time out of college. I moved to Durham, North Carolina. I took a job as a hotel manager for the Washington Duke Inn and Golf Club. I probably shouldn't say the name of it, but here we are. I was supposed to be the front desk manager in training. And it was this amazing program where like, it would be like a month training with the front desk and then a month training with catering and then a month training with the country club. And then I'm well-versed in all of these things and like general GM material for another hotel. Well, they cut the program beforehand and then they could just skip all the steps and give me a manager job. I tell them, hey, I have no experience in this. Are you sure? They were sure. I bombed that job. I was terrible at it. Again, first job out of college, the worst. I had to wake up at like 4 a.m. and then I would have to stay until 11:30 p.m. usually. And I would just get hammered anytime that I could outside of work. I hated my job. Eventually quit. And eventually I started working at a financial firm and I was working the phones. So, hi, thanks so much for calling. Fill in the blank. How can I help you today? Absolutely. I can certainly help you with your 401k. Ow. Yeah, that's a tough question. Let me look into your file. Like I got really, really, really good at that because I had already done retail previously, which is another life. But again, it was miserable work. I was telling old people that thought that they had saved enough money. Hey, I'm so sorry, but you didn't save enough money and there's nothing in this account. People would tell me that they wished I died, that they wish my mother died. And actually that happened 2 days later. Somebody told me that. So the next chaotic event happened to me. So post-school, I move in with my boyfriend at the time. I'm working at Fidelity Investments. There you go. There's the name of it. And my mom comes to visit. She helps me settle in my apartment. We're best friends, extremely close. About 2 months later, I get a call from my sister. She's gotten a call from my uncle, who's gotten a call from the police, that she had a brain aneurysm behind the wheel of her car 2 days before Christmas and died at 62. The last words that she said were, I don't feel right, because she was on the phone with my aunt and she just died. And I write a lot of poetry about that and try really hard to grieve through it. But the night in the hospital, my cousin came and she is my age. And she said, what do you need? Anything you need. And I said, if you get me a bottle of wine, that's all I need. And so she did. And I didn't drink it. And I can tell you that at that point I was an alcoholic. And so For most people, the drinking of it would be the sign. For me, that the not drinking of it was the sign that I was just so upset and depressed. So having a crappy job, dealing with my mom's passing, propelled me into a new level of drinking. I started fighting with my boyfriend all the time. We were living together. It wasn't going well. He was really self-centered sometimes, and I was beside myself with guilt from being drunk all the time, but not wanting to stop being drunk all the time. And I never stopped. My friend and I, one of my favorite stories about alcohol, and again, hindsight 2020, my friend met me for brunch at this place that's attached to a really fancy grocery store. And in the fancy grocery store, you can also drink wine. Well, we proceed to get absolutely hammered in between brunch and the grocery store, and I fall in the pasta aisle. So that happened about 3 weeks after my mom's passing. What happened about 6 months after my mom's passing was my DUI. I left a work party from that Fidelity had thrown. It was bowling. I got absolutely hammered because everybody kept taking shots, and I get behind the wheel of my car. I start driving. I call an Uber. I try to park in a neighborhood. I run the curb, try to overcompensate the wheel. My passenger front wheel pops off of my brand new Civic and rips the wheel completely off, which is damaging. It totaled my brand new car. I went up to the nearest house. I knocked on the door. I said, "I'm so sorry. I've been in an accident and I am completely hammered. Please call the police." So there are some really great things that you can do in your life. And I think always having integrity and always being honest is the best way to go about things. However, that was a level of honesty that I don't recommend. Just ever. Just don't be that honest, but also just try not to drink and drive if you get into that position. So I spent the next year dealing with an attorney that took advantage of me, paying outrageous fees and having to pay multiple companies to get my face off of the internet anytime you would Google my name, because it was absolutely miserable. So that happened. I quit Fidelity. I was so miserable. And I started temp work at an ophthalmology clinic for a while. I was doing just anything I could do to make ends meet and stay afloat while also drinking as much as I physically could. So temp work was great. I started as a researcher at a jury research company, and it was part-time work. My boyfriend was in law school at Chapel Hill, and he told me about this opportunity. I met the owner and CEO of the company, and she loved me immediately, and I hit it off with her really well. And within 2 weeks, I was the internal communications director, which was a title not given to me until much later, but I had an office and I had all the things, so I'm going with it. So I was the internal communications director for the largest jury research firm in the nation, and drinking a shitload. What I failed to mention is my boss, who again is a woman. She's kind of a power boss. Like, she has expectations for her employees that were extremely strong, and she had ideas of the way that she wanted you to work, and she made me nervous. And one day she came in and she asked me if I knew Bill, and I had no idea what she was talking about. And I asked her, I was like, "Tiffany, what did you mean by that?" Nothing, don't worry about it. Well, she had caught on to the fact that I was drinking, not ever on the job, but when I was getting home, because she had also struggled in the same ways. So that was a magical time for me in hindsight to look back and say, okay, like these were the places that life was coming in and saying, "You need help, you need help, you need help." So I didn't understand what she was asking. I continued to work there for years. COVID hit. I broke up with my boyfriend. We were engaged. We broke up with each other. I didn't break up with him. He would be upset if I said that. And I started dating. I got on Tinder, and that was the first time I dated anybody in like 7 years. And I was a hot commodity. Like, I was dating like rocket scientists and shit, y'all. Like, I had no idea that anybody would be interested in dating me, let alone like fancy people that I was fascinated by and that were interesting to speak to. And so I got a lot out of this experience, but I was also putting myself in incredibly dangerous positions by drinking and getting hammered before dates because I would be too anxious and nervous. And I was performing while on these dates because I was an alcoholic and very, very good at it. But I'm sure I wasn't as good as I think I was. I'm sure there were some moments where people were like, the hell is wrong with this girl? But it was a fairly good time until I started dating this man who was in the military. We dated for about 7 months. It didn't work out. He was a very specific person and really made me feel small. And I was all too happy for that to happen because he didn't look at my drinking. But he made me feel very tiny. And he would drink and get too drunk and drink bourbon and become kind of an asshole. But I would drink a smaller amount, but more consistently. And so I found him and I felt like, okay, I can do this and be safe. And like, I like him. Let's see how this goes. But ultimately, he was just a drinking buddy. So by the time we broke up, I was a mess. My grandmother had just died. It was Christmas time, which is the anniversary of my mother's death. And I proceeded to start having wine delivered to my door. And I had it delivered as much as I could. So I would place like 3 orders in a day, 4 orders in a day for boxes. I was packing boxes and like hiding them and taking them out in the middle of the night so no one would see that it was me putting all of the black boxes into the dumpster. I was humiliated by myself, and my apartment was a disgusting mess. I fancy myself like 90% of us do, a bit of an interior designer. I love it. I love it. I love it a lot. My mom and I flipped houses when she was alive, and she let me kind of take on the interiors. I loved it. My apartment was so disgusting that when my sisters, by the time everything was said and done, my sisters and my ex-fiance, now boyfriend, came to help, and they threw up. They said it was like mom died all over again. That seeing me living like that made them feel like mom had died. So basically what the breakup had done was propelled me into the state of isolation where I didn't want to talk to anybody. I couldn't talk to anybody because during waking hours I was drunk and I didn't want people to know. I was living in filth and I was losing my ability to walk. I didn't have full consciousness of this at the time because I kept thinking, I'm hungover, I'm super dehydrated, I need to hydrate and then I'll be able to walk. That wasn't the case, y'all. That's not how the body works. And I know that now, but I didn't at the time. So I made the call May of last year to my partner. And I was like, hey, I hope you're in the state of North Carolina. I have no idea where you are, but I really need help. I'm drunk. I've been drunk for a very long time. And I have to have help, and I have to have somebody help me down the stairs because my dogs haven't been out in 2 weeks. And that was the most embarrassing phone call I've ever had to make. But he came with no questions asked. And he showed up and he loved me and took me to the hospital where I was for a week and a half. And then I tried Pavillon for a few weeks. I was still too ill. I couldn't walk. I was still too ill. So Pavillon actually sent me back to the hospital where I was again for another few weeks in Mission Hospital in Asheville. And then I came back to finish and complete the Pavillon program. I am so grateful I did that. Since then, I have been completely sober. My life has meaning that I didn't know it had. And I no longer feel shame about these moments that I've talked to you about. I feel extreme pride that I've lived through them. And to those sitting at Pavillon, I'm just so proud of you. And I highly recommend finding an art like poetry or writing or painting or clay making. I don't know, just something, because it really is a lifesaver on the other side of things. So I think that's all I have to say.